NordVPN know nothing about knuckleballs, but they can help you with online safety. If you need a VPN, use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount and 4 months for free. They also have a 30-day money-back guarantee, which is risk-free. The link is in the show notes. So stop thinking about knuckleballs for 2 minutes and go to nordvpn.com/Kimber and get your deal.
Support us on Patreon. Join for exclusive perks like AMAs, live calls with me, and a vibrant Discord community. Enjoy ad-free content, early podcast episodes, and access to my emailer, plus behind-the-scenes stuff. We've built our channel on Patreon support, so a huge thanks to everyone who has helped. In cricket, I don't believe in momentum, but when it comes to my social media videos, I like memento. Its AI listens to me so that I don't have to, and then it can chuck in GIFs and subtitles and make it all fit all the different kinds of social media sizes. Memento does it all. It slices, it dices, and it resizes all of your hottest takes, your coldest facts, and your weirdest vibes. Grab it today and make your content start smashing the ball all around social media.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 67 of the Uncovered podcast. I'm your host, Behram Kazi, who you can find at DefMango on Twitter. And with me, as always, is Jared Kimber, who you can find absolutely everywhere. Lots of stuff to talk about today. We'll start with the India versus Afghanistan T20 series, which is ongoing in India. And Jared, India have taken an unassailable 2-0 lead in this 3-match series. And the star of the show has been all-rounder Shivam Dube, who hasn't been dismissed in this series thus far. And he scored 60 in the first game, 63 in the second, played match-winning knocks, scored at a strike rate of 150 in the first and nearly 200 in the second. And this CSK all-rounder basically is taking this claim. And I want to know what you think. Is he a solid shout over here for the T20 World Cup squad?
It's funny. I think he was with Rajasthan before, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
And I remember someone at Rajasthan reaching out to me about their team at the time, and I can't remember how many years ago this was, but it wasn't that long ago. And they were asking, and I said, look, I think they are batting him at 5 or 6 at the time, and I said I don't know much about him or anything, but I think if he's going to work in a sort of domestic environment, you want him up the order that little bit more, and you want to almost make him feel like a batter, even if he isn't a batter. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think I think what really changed for him was that when they had the more expanded, I'm trying to think of the right, when they brought in the new franchises, it meant that he suddenly had a position available to him to bat further up the order rather than, having an overseas. Like, he went from being kind of more of he's in your side because you need another local player to now he's more useful, and it put a little bit more pressure on him, and it made him think about his batting a little bit more. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you might remember, I can't remember the full details, but I think in this series so far, he's certainly batted at number 4 in one of those games. Does that sound right?
I think 4 and 5.
Yeah. And so I think, beforehand, he probably would have been seen as more of a 6 and 7, right? And he has developed very, very quickly. I think the issue for him is probably going to be his bowling. I know he's been successful in this series so far, but my memory is he's going at like 9 or 10 runs and over. He's taken a couple of wickets. So he's not like a Hardik Pandya version. And will he be able to do what he has done better in the IPL and against Afghanistan in knockout games? Right? Against the best teams in the world when it matters. Those would be my only questions. But on a basic level, I always thought that this sort of batting him at number 4 and letting him be I'm trying to think of what player, like not quite a Maxwell, but like a number 4 with license, right? Like maybe like a Puran type number 4, right? But his bowling, you have to be careful with his bowling, and it's going to go wrong, and that's more than fine for a player of his talent. But he's probably more of a supplementary player based on the fact that I think they're just going to have other people who can bat at number 4 with more talent than him, right? But if he's in your squad and you can... I always think players like him are very handy in that it gives you a flexibility. If you can get someone who can bat in your top 4 and give you 1 over a game, that just gives you that little bit more flexibility with everything else. And no one's expecting him to bowl 4 overs a game, and, you and I could probably score off him. We'd probably both go out, but we'd probably score off him along the way. Like, that's kind of how he goes. But that one over can be quite important. And we've seen that with players like Marcus Stoinis and, Liam Livingston. Well, Liam Livingston might even be more than that. But those sorts of players where one over from that top area, Aiden Markram's probably another one, just allows you that little bit of flexibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And whatever he's done, or the role clarity, or whatever the background stuff is, it's clearly working for him. And options are plenty for India in the middle order. So it's going to be really interesting what players they take to the USA and Caribbean. Speaking of which, the top order conundrum is also something interesting that's going on over here now. Yashasvi Jaiswal scored 68 of 34 in the second T20 International. He had a prolific IPL season, as did Shubman Gill. And now you have Virat Kohli in the mix, who also likes to open in T20 cricket, but can also bat first drop. And then Rohit Sharma is obviously there, and he's scored 2 ducks in this series. So, India will have
He's finished, yells Bayram.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people, at least the Kohli fans, will be saying that, right? But there will be some really tough calls over here that India will have to make come T20 World Cup.
I think the biggest issue is, and I don't think I've changed my opinion on this in 3 or 4 years. And I think me and Ben Jones might have done a podcast about this early on the Red Inca days. Essentially, when it comes down to it, modern T20 cricket doesn't really need Rohit Sharma and Virat Kohli in the one side, right? It's not a strength. If there's anyone who'll know what I'm talking about, will be a Pakistani fan, right? Of Babar Azam and Mohammad Rizwan. It's not that they're both not talented. It's just that the game has kind of evolved so that if you have both of those players there, your bowlers need to be really striking well above average in order to keep you in it. You'll chase good totals, and on dodgy wickets, you'll make your 160 and your bowlers will be able to defend it and everything else. But it's not really how T20 is played. Now, we've seen Virat Kohli, or we've heard Virat Kohli, and I suppose saw him, he had a strike rate of 180 the other night. He give himself a nosebleed going at those kinds of scores, right? But one of them has to do that. That's just the truth of it. And if not, they're going to have to go with younger players. Now, in World Cups, generally, despite the fact that fans are always obsessed over younger players and always want the younger player to come in until that younger player gets old, and then they want them out so they can get the next younger player in. But the truth is, in World Cups, older players usually do better. And that's because they've kind of seen it all. And, as we've talked about before, they're problem-solving events and everything else. So you would be, I always think you would be better off, to be in a situation where you have a mature player who can learn how to play that new role, rather than the opposite, which is a young player who you hope does very well. So someone like Moin Khan having the 1999 World Cup where he strikes at a ridiculous rate, or Marcus Stoinis in the 2021 World Cup, was it?
Yep.
Those sorts of players. Oh, Matthew Wade is another perfect example, both in that World Cup, of Australia probably had better options or other options that they could have brought in at that time. But they went, look, we've got an experienced player who's played all around the world, and he's now worked out how to bat in the middle order. Let's just give him a go. With Matthew Wade, it was almost the opposite. They were like, we don't know if we have a better wicketkeeper. Let's give Matthew Wade the job of doing that. Jaiswal, Gill, we could go on and on about, some of the Indian talent that could come in to that top order. They're not Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma. Right? They don't have that. But if they're both going to chip the ball around 135 strike rates, they're both not going to help India win a World Cup. One of them can do that, because then you use that player as a floating anchor in that sort of way. But there's no real reason to have two of them. And I think that you will struggle to catch up with Australia, England, South Africa, maybe even New Zealand at times, if you play that kind of game.
Yeah, it's very interesting how this is a very good analogy with respect to Pakistan as well, as you mentioned, because, Pakistan have got two really exciting young power play batters in Saim Ayub and Mohammad Haris, and then you've got Babar and Rizwan. Now, you have to have one of those guys striking at high strike rates. Otherwise, it's going to be really tough to field them in the same T20 11. So I think you're spot on.
And the other way goes there as well. It's when everyone got really excited about Mohammad Haris, but then we actually saw him and we're like, he's quite a one-dimensional player, right? He's very good against right arm pace. Not as good as against different kinds of spin, struggle with left arm seam and everything else. That's because he's not a fully developed international player yet. He might get to that level. He might not. Some players never do. Martin Guptill kind of was a high functioning single unit. There were certain kinds of bowling Martin Guptill never hit, right? But he was so good against the others, he could cover it. But the point being is, with the young players, all we see is the upside, right? And with the old players, all we see is the downside. Where what we're saying here is it's probably still worth India having the older players around, but not if they both play the same role in a team when they have other players who can come in and play other roles. And I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, and I mean, it's definitely worth having both of those guys in the squad because of the experience they bring. And of course, like you said, big match situations where things can get tricky. I mean, Virat Kohli's knock at the MCG versus Pakistan is literally proof of that, right? So it's interesting, how all of these teams are faring, and T20 cricket has changed so much. Plus, I don't know about the USA. We spoke a bit off the record about what the conditions might be like because we don't have an awful lot of data. But surfaces do tend to be a bit slower in the Caribbean, and power play utilization or optimality over there is very, very imperative to a team's success. Anyway, I'll take this time to talk a little bit about whoever has sent in some comments. So Subhashish Bharali is here. He is talking about how Steve Smith's decision to open the batting is refreshing. We're coming up with a podcast on that on Footmarks, so stay tuned for that. RSR says it's 2 a.m. in India. How does this timing work for Bahram? Bahram's a night owl. I guess that's the only...
He's up later than me, like every night. Like him and Cheyenne, like they both go to sleep after I do. Mind you, when I was younger, I used to do that too. I'm just too old now and too many kids.
Also, I have a very flexible routine because I have to record shows for a living and write stuff. So, I mean, I can work things around that way and I can get to play my PlayStation. Nishant Jha says, hi, Behram bhai. Hello to you as well, Nishant. Arko's saying, yo, come on, you late. We always are. I think you should get used to that, right?
I actually also think we might have put in the wrong time because someone might have put in the BST, not the GMT.
Yeah. I think that's on me because I didn't know there was a switch over there or that BST is defunct or whatnot. We've also got Keshav Huria and Pratik Jha. He says, Behram, my man, right back at you. And Dr. Daywalker, who has brought up Rohit Stuck. So I hope, your question was answered over there. Anyway, moving on to Afghanistan. Now, only one Afghan batter crossed 50 in both games. Surprisingly, that was Gulbadim Naib at first drop in the second T20 International. But, sure, Rashid Khan is in rehab post-surgery. So Afghanistan were always going to find it tough in the series, which they were even with him there. But without him, it's even more tough. And you've got to say that the batting hasn't produced the goods like it did in the ODI World Cup. But also, that's because players like Ibrahim Zadran and Rahmat Shah are suited to the ODI format, but not T20s, whereas they do have some hitters. So how do you look at this Afghan batting lineup in T20 cricket?
Yeah, it's not the same. I think... I can't remember when it was, but I've been writing about it for a while that they're sort of setting themselves up as sort of a lot of anchor players in the ODI cricket. And then that sort of hopefully 5, 6, 7 have, usually obviously they have one exciting opener, which they're going to have for a while. And then, 3 or 4 sort of anchors throughout the rest of their lineup. T20 cricket, their big skill back in the old days was that everyone was kind of a number 8. So they had about 10 blokes who could come in and slog the ball and get you 20 off 12. And it's not quite that kind of a team anymore. They will... I don't think Pakistan... I don't think Afghanistan is ever going to have trouble with finding hitters because of the way their cricket has developed and everything else. What they really need to do now, and this is the tough bit for someone like Jonathan Trott, is how do you get the guys who can score at strike rates of 70 in ODI cricket to score at strike rates of 125 to 130 in T20 cricket? Then I don't think they're going to get 140, 145, out of those sorts of players. But they need probably an anchor who can score at a run rate that doesn't drag down everyone else, and then for everyone else to hit around. And because of the fragility of the Afghanistani batting lineup in T20 cricket, they might need 2 anchors where another team only needs 1. But they, there's a couple of players in that side that I know didn't make any runs so far, but they've obviously got Najibullah. Missing someone else. I meant
there's Rahmanullah Gurbaz. He's terrific in the power play.
So Gurbaz and Azmatullah Omazai is so there's 3 guys there that I all kind of back to be decent score, decently fast scorers. But what it needs to be backed up with still a couple of guys who give them that sort of spine of their side. Incredible that Mohammad Nabi and Gulbaddin, I think, are their 2 leading scorers in that squad, and yet are a combined age of 400. I don't know. Does anyone know how old Gulbaddin actually is? Because he was a former bodybuilder right? When they did that BBC documentary on the team in like 2006. It's 2024, Bayram. He still looks about 32. Like, because most of the Afghanistani players, even when they are young, look 40, right? They're just, and yet he looks young now and looked young back then. At a certain point, are we not sure he hasn't been cloned, Gulbuddin? Like that, they're just every 5 years we just get a new Gulbuddin and no one notices.
Maybe they've injected the blood or whatever of Popeye the Sailor Man into Gulbuddin's veins because he clearly looks like him.
He's got the guns, doesn't he? Look, he's a lovely, lovely person. I spent a little bit of time with him during the 2019 World Cup, and he thanked me for my coverage. I don't think I've ever had a male cricketer say that before. Maybe the associate cricketers, but I'm not even sure any of those have actually said those words. But he's not very good. And he tries really hard, which makes him, I think, a really good cricketer to support from that point of view. But it's incredible to see him still out there making runs.
Yeah, well, ethnically, the Pathan people who are there's some in Pakistan as well, Shaheen Shah Afridi, Mohammad Rizwan, and then all of the Afghan boys, they are perceived as stronger, tougher. And, there's a case over there. We've got some evidence. And before we go on break,
wait a minute, can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
Gulbuddin on Cricinfo is 32.
No
he doesn't
chance.
remember when his son turned 32.
That's hilarious. I think Mohammad Nabi is also quite old, and that age is.
But Mohammad Nabi looks old. So even it's the whole Misbah Yunus thing, right? Where like Yunus is like, well, obviously I'm much older than my actual stated age, and we all understand that, and that's fine. That's a perfect acceptable. But Gulbuddin doesn't make any sense at all because if he's 32 passing, right? But he's been playing cricket for 40 years.
Okay, so before we go on break, there's someone in the comments called Jay Rich, and he says that he loves all the work that you do, Jared, but he thinks your takes on Bangladesh cricket are lazy. So you want to say something to that?
No, they're not lazy. I mean, what does that mean? We did heaps and heaps of work on Bangladesh cricket. I've talked to pitch curators there. I've talked to players. I've worked with a franchise for a little bit. No, it's just nonsense. If anyone thinks I'm lazy when it comes to their team, what they're really saying is they spend all their time focusing on their team. There are, 600 professional cricketers that I have in my mind at any one time, right? There are 43 different T20 competitions going on at the moment, plus international games being played. It is almost impossible. I had a young cricket journalist asked me to train him in how I did what I did. And I think his head exploded and he decided to just cover his team from then on in. It is really, really hard. But if you spend most of your time being interested in Bangladesh cricket, I don't. What I do is I look for key trends within their team. So of recent times, it's that young injection of batting that's been coming through. So if you have a look, I've done a few different projects on that kind of batting that's come through, talked about it on podcasts and everything else. And the other thing is, the bowlers, the seam bowlers that have come through, and a little bit on the all-round nature of Mahedi, I suppose, as well, right? Those are the key things I need to know about Bangladesh at the moment, because Bangladesh is neither the worst team, nor are they a team that is about to be a proper semi-finalist. If you go back, I think you'll see I was pretty accurate about them in the last World Cup. I think they underperformed my beliefs, but I think there are a lot of people thinking they're a semi-final chance. I think you'll see that I never thought they were a semi-final chance coming in. So if even in my laziness, it's still accuracy. But you've got to remember that I'm not covering each individual. But Mohammad Isam is going to know more about Bangladesh cricket than I'm ever going to know about Bangladesh cricket. Dan Bredig is going to know more about Australian cricket than I'm ever going to know about Australian cricket. But the rest of them, they don't know all the other things that I know about all these different teams. And that is what this gig is. But imagine calling me lazy. I literally broadcast 83 hours a day, dude.
Yeah, I can attest to this, right? I've been working with Jared for 7-8 months, and there's a lot of things that you can call him, but lazy is not one of them.
I did 5 podcasts yesterday, right? I did 5 podcasts yesterday. Today I've done a TalkSport podcast. I was on Dealt With Cricket on their TikTok channel. I'm now doing 2 podcasts again with Bayram. And while Bayram was getting his times confused, I was off writing another episode and still helping on another episode that we've done. Like, I'm a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
Not that.
Definitely not. And I mean, we've brought up Tawheed Ridoy multiple times on this
Yeah,
podcast.
as I said, Shanto, Ridoy, that kind of.
Yeah.
So that's kind of just to explain it a little bit more. I'm kind of constantly evaluating where teams are, right? Men and women, less so franchises, although sometimes franchises. And what I'm looking for is an interesting shift. Have they changed the way they played? Have they changed the way they selected? Are they on the way up? Are they on the way down? Are they about to be the worst team? Because then I'm very interested, right? Are they about to be better than they've ever been before? Then I'm very interested. But think
Are they
about
going
that.
to change their surfaces at home?
All these sorts of things. So if you think about it, men's and women's cricket, I probably now have about 22 teams, or if you count the associates, maybe about 24 to 26 teams, where I have a mental idea of where those teams are. So when I hear news about a team, I'm like, okay, is this interesting? Is this something I can fit into everything else? That's before the fact that the Melbourne Stars didn't make the finals again. And, everyone wants me to talk about the Melbourne Stars. And once the IPL starts, everyone's going to ask me about RCB, right? And all those, who's the really crap team in the PSL for years? Was it Lahore?
For ages, but then they won 2 in a row.
Exactly. So Lahore for years, that was another one where I had to keep my mind on Lahore. Obviously, when Islamabad were being quite interesting, when Northamptonshire were being interesting, right? These are all the little things that I'm trying to keep in my head at any one time, on top of individual players and everything else. And, we've got a couple of big interviews coming up on Red Inca and stuff. There might have been a player who's played very good cricket of recent times who might be coming on the podcast, all these sorts of things. So and Bayram will know, when he started with me, he was pretty much, Pakistan centric. He knows just trying to keep up with what we are doing. And you're on 3 podcasts a week, 4 podcasts a week?
Yeah, 3 podcasts a week.
Yeah. Just trying to keep up with that. And that's not including the YouTube channel and the emailer and my outside work. It's a job keeping up with all this sort of stuff. So you could call me wrong. You could definitely argue with anything else. But if you call me lazy, spend 24 hours in my life and you would actually physically pass out. Die? I was going to say die, but maybe that's a bit extreme.
Yeah, that is a bit too dark. And Arko has appreciated your analysis of Bangladesh cricket. So, Jay, Rich, we plan to do a really short podcast today. And because of you, we've gone at least 7 minutes over. So anyway, I think that's a good note to take a break. And you're watching Uncovered with Jared and Bayram. Stay tuned. We'll be back after this short ad break.
If you watch this channel, you'll love us on Main, where we do deep dives into the greatest cricket stories every week at Good Areas. How did Virat Kohli play that shot? What is so weird about Neil Wagner? And explaining the incredible misery of being a New Zealand opening batter. Visit our Good Areas site today. Want to show the world that you not only love cricket, but that you know the game deeply? Well, you need a Bodyline t-shirt. In fact, at Bodyline t-shirts, you can actually buy a t-shirt about Bodyline, but also tees inspired by the greatest players in our game. Head to Bodyline t-shirts today.
Welcome back to the Uncovered podcast with Bayram and Jared. Next up, we're going to talk about New Zealand versus Pakistan. There's a 5-match T20I series going on, and New Zealand have won the first 2 games. And the biggest story coming out of their camp, Jared, has been Finn Allen. Now, the explosive opener has played 37 T20 internationals now. He was the replacement of Martin Guptill. He already averages 20 and a half and only has 4 50s. But one of those 50s has come in this series, in which he has been in blistering touch. A quick fire 34 in the first game and 74 of 41 in the second. He's hitting form at the perfect time for the Black Caps, which will encourage them because they've put a lot of faith in this player, haven't they, Jared?
Look, the thing with New Zealand cricket is that it doesn't really matter who the player is. They kind of have to put faith in them. They're never going to have more than 20, 22 players at any stage that are international quality, right? Like, it's not like, Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or even some of the other smaller countries who, non-major countries, I should say. They kind of have to invest in these players. And I think we talked about it recently. Finn Allen, Glenn Phillips, Mark Chapman, Tim Seifert? Seifert, yeah. Tim Seifert. There's 4 guys who clearly are international quality limited overs players, right? And they haven't quite taken it. Now, they've been lucky because, obviously Rachin Ravindra and Daryl Mitchell and Will Young, like a lot of these guys have just come in and just looked like they've been playing.
Conway?
Devon Conway, yeah, really good example. So they've been lucky from that point of view. But I think that if you look at the players I just mentioned then, Mitchell, even Ravindra, and Conway are probably more anchory type players. They're not necessarily all anchors, but they are that kind of player. Whereas Finn Allen and Glenn Phillips specifically are potentially 150, 160 strike rate type players, right?
I mean, I would challenge you over there because I think that Daryl Mitchell in particular is evolving his game. He's definitely justifying that IPL price tag. Slammed 61 of 27 in the first game, and he's been a revelation for the Kiwis ever since he broke onto the scene. And like you mentioned, he papers over those cracks of all of these young guys not performing. I don't think I've seen a better batter hit straight sixes down the ground in recent times than Daryl Mitchell.
I mean, yes and no. What I would say about that is he last year he played 18 T20s and a strike rate of 122. Right? So you've seen him in a couple of games hit some sixes. No one has any doubt that he can hit sixes. He quite often takes a long time to get started. That's kind of what I more mean by an anchor. We know power-wise, he has no problem. We saw him in the World Cup, in 2021 when he got New Zealand through that final. But he takes a long time to get started. He's never going to be, I don't think, someone who can consistently score quickly from ball one, right? That is what Finn Allen does. That is what Glenn Phillips can do. They have the ability of... So Finn Allen, I'm trying to think of someone he could be like, maybe an Alex Hales type player, right? And Glenn Phillips is a Glenn Maxwell type player, right? So Daryl Mitchell, they've got him anyway, so that's already a bonus. The point is that they have these other guys that haven't quite been able to step up against the best opponents consistently in the major tournaments so far. None of these guys have taken over the IPL the way... when Finn Allen first came through, people were talking him up as, a Dewald Brevis type level of player for a little while. We haven't seen anything near that. We haven't seen anything from Dewald Brevis either. But you know what I mean? We haven't seen that come through yet. We can tell that it's there, but there are other issues within his batting. And I think being able to do this against who they play? Pakistan. I just want to have a look. So he made, 71 of 41? 74? Yeah, 74 of 41.
That was Finn Allen.
Yeah, that's who I'm talking about. Who did I say then?
Okay. I thought you were talking about Daryl Mitchell originally.
No, Daryl Mitchell. He's fine. We're all cool with Daryl Mitchell. But for Finn Allen to be able to do what we have seen so far in this series against Shaheen, Harris Ralph, Usama Mir, Amir Jamal, this is not quite World Cup final level attack, but it's top 6 teams in the World Cup level attack, right? And to be able to do that against them, that is the level of jump that they need, because they already have Conway and Ravindra and Daryl Mitchell, and I'm trying to think who else is in their top order at the moment. Who else do they have?
Kane's there.
Kane. Yeah, he's pretty handy. And so they really need Glenn Phillips or Finn Allen, and maybe even Mark Chapman, who I still think is not far behind some of those guys on talent, but, or Seifert to come back in or whatever that may be, just because we're talking about the level here between maybe making a semi-final or a final and being a genuine title winning team. And I think on talent, New Zealand is okay, but they're just a team that can't have a couple of underperformance. It has to be that they're at their very best when everyone sort of steps up. And we've seen that again and again. And, how old's Finn Allen now, do you think?
I think he's probably mid-20s because he's been around for a bit, right?
Yeah, so he's not yet 25. So if it happens when he's 26, that's fine. But this is why he's been carried for so long, because they know that the upside of Finn Allen is extraordinary, right? And it's the same reason Mark Chapman's been carried so long and Glenn Phillips has been carried so long. No, I wouldn't have thought any of those guys have massively plus records in international cricket at the moment. Finn Allen, 27 ODI batting average and 24 T20 batting average, but with a 158 strike rate, which is kind of goes back to what I'm saying. So, they are betting on these guys eventually coming good. And then they have the more consistent players around them, Kane and Daryl and Conway and these sorts of players. So it's an interesting time for them. But that is, I think that's a difference between them being a good team and being like a legit, top level team.
Yeah, I mean, if all of those guys come to the party, they're definitely contenders because they've shown us time and again. It's a repeated trend over here that New Zealand will find a way to make the
Yeah.
knockouts. Can they go one step better? That's been the challenge. And the World Test Championship final was different. It's a one-off game. That was a golden generation playing that game, and they even had the better of the conditions in England versus India. So
Well,
lots
also,
of things over there.
that was a test where they had an incredible bowling lineup that hasn't really ever existed for them too much before then and hasn't existed since. In one-day cricket, you need not that you need more of a combination. Obviously, you need batters in Test cricket as well, but in tests, bowlers win you the games, and in one-day cricket, generally, it's the batters who win you the games, whereas it's still bowlers who win you the tournaments. But that's a slightly different a way of looking at things. But point being that I think you're right that I don't think it is talent. I do think there are young players coming through over there that are very, very interesting. But if Finn Allen and Glenn Phillips and Mark Chapman and Tim Seifert don't get to that level quickly, my guess is, looking at their team, that the bowling is going to fall off, right? They've got, Ish Shodhi isn't as old as he feels, but Tim Southee, obviously is, and Trent Bolt is getting on as well. And Kyle Jamieson's quite often injured, and, it's not... and Lockie is quite often injured, and Milner's quite often injured, and everything else. Like, I don't know how long they're going to have one of those two great old seamers, a young fast, or a properly fast bowler, and good quality spin available to them at the same time. Their time is probably this World Cup in America. The next tournament, it might just be a completely different generation coming through, especially from the bowling perspective.
Yeah, with respect to the batters, I would say one thing that Pakistan, for 30 overs out of 40 in these two T20s, bowled absolute garbage, and they pitched.
That's not ideal. That seems suboptimal, man.
Yeah. And they were good.
If I was your analyst, I would suggest not doing that.
Yeah, I mean, in the last 10 overs of the second T20, they pulled things back quite considerably. But other than that, they've been bang average, I feel. And I mean, I don't want to take anything away from New Zealand as a batting side, but their job was definitely made easy. With respect to the bowling, I'll tell you this. I've seen some of Ben Sears bowling this series, and I'm quite impressed. And he, could go for runs at times, but he definitely looks like someone who could, cut it at that level. If Milne's fitness holds up, he took a four-fer in the second T20, so he could be an option for that T20 World Cup. But Tim Southee, now, this is someone who I feel is New Zealand's unsung hero because he often falls under the radar. But in this series, he took 4 wickets in the first game and 2 in the second. Hasn't gone for very many runs either. Is really, nailing that slow one and those cutters, which is quite impressive. And I guess that's, it comes with all the experience, and he's always been a skilled bowler. But here's the fun fact. He has now surpassed 150 wickets in T20 internationals, and that's the most for any bowler. So, yeah, that's quite something. Yeah.
I didn't realize that. I mean, I wonder how much of that is also that he's not always been in demand on the franchise circuit. Although, having said that, he has actually played IPL. He hasn't played a lot of games, but he's been on a lot of benches and in a lot of squads. Look, he's a clever bowler. If New Zealand get through to, a clutch game, having a bowler like that available to them is incredible. I don't think he's ever been a hugely great T20 bowler. Tell me about Sears. My notes on Sears say he's a little bit slow. What sort of paces was he bowling?
I actually wasn't looking at the paces all that.
How did he feel to you? What kind of pace did he feel like?
In the second game, he feel like someone who was hard to get underneath. And I think that's a valuable skill. So, I mean, there are all of these...
I've always felt like I'm a man who's hard to get underneath, but I don't know what that means.
I'll tell you this, I've seen a lot of fringe New Zealand bowlers in recent times because they've also sent those sort of teams to Pakistan during the IPL and whatnot. Blair Tickner, Scott Kugelheim and the likes. And I think Ben Sears is the one that's looked most impressive out of those guys. Whether he can cut it at even Matt Henry level or Lockie level, that's still yet to be seen. But, with respect to Southee, he's been in Bolt's shadow a bit as well. But obviously Bolt, if you'd give me an option to pick one of those bowlers for my team, I'd always pick Bolt, right?
Well, I mean, the weird thing with Southee is if you look at the 4 main seamers of modern New Zealand cricket, Wagner is a force up on to himself, right? He's just almost move him aside. Kyle
Wagner
Jameson
is a disruptor, right?
Yeah.
That's something completely different.
Exactly. And then you've got Jameson, who obviously came in and was just so fantastic in Test cricket. How could you not talk about him? And Bolt has probably, maybe not every year, but consistently been that little bit better than Southee. And you could throw in, Milne and Henry and Ferguson, all these other guys who've done well. I always thought that the most interesting thing that Southee ever did was when he came in. So I called straight away, maybe his first or second game, that he'd be a 10-year player. And a lot of people are like, what are you talking about? Because he was about 18 or 19. But I was like, well, he's tall and he bowls an outswinger and he's accurate. Like, he really shouldn't get hit all that much in Test cricket. But he did struggle a little bit in that middle bit of his career. And then I think it was him and Alan Donald worked together. And he put on about a yard and a half of pace. Since then, he's also gone through that Jimmy Anderson level of the things that he can do with the ball. He's not quite skillful in the way that Jimmy Anderson is, but he's got two different versions of the wobble ball that he bowls, for instance. And, very, very clever at the way he thinks through situations. He's probably still a yard too slow to be a consistent threat, but he just works and tries his way through. Also always a big fan of any fast bowler who can field in the slips.
Always a big fan of fast bowlers who captain sides as well. And he's done that fairly well for New Zealand. Really good sub for Kane Williamson. And Kane actually got injured, Jared. He pulled a hamstring, I believe, and he is unlikely to feature in the remainder of this T20 series. He's been unlucky with those injuries because he was looking in good touch. Sluggish 57 in the first game off 42 balls. But in the second game where he got injured, he was going at quite a good click. So that's a bit of a worry, isn't it, for them now?
He just keeps picking up injuries. I mean... you always worry. There are some injuries that they call, the old man injuries. But at a certain point, when every couple of games you have a different injury, it's just like, it doesn't matter if it's the old man injury or not. Like maybe your body is trying to tell you something. If I told you that Williamson was going to play for another 4 years, would you be surprised or would you think that was right?
I would say he'd have to give up a format or two.
Yeah. I mean, there's a part of me that thinks he could easily play for another 4 years if he wanted to. And also a part of me that thinks he might quit tomorrow. And I don't think he will. But I mean, just from the injuries and everything else, like I can tell you with the elbow injury, he wasn't that far away from just throwing it in. So it's already happened once where he's, thought about his future maybe rather than throwing it in. But point being is I have no idea of how long he wants to play for and everything else. But if he keeps getting injured, maybe that gets answered for him.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting because Kane Williamson, his weakest format is probably T20 cricket, and that's the one where the money is. So there's some interesting calls to be made over here, and I'm keen to see how his career unfolds. Usha Arora is asking our thoughts on Smith as test opener. There's an entire podcast coming on that. I've mentioned this before as well. Footmarks this week is on the Smith opening experiment. And, Kane Williamson is a certified anchor. There's another one playing in this series. And Babar Azam is batting at first drop after a lengthy period of, batting as opener. He's the leading run scorer across both teams with back-to-back 50s, but he's getting a lot of stick on social media because even though those strike rates
because he's batting too fast?
I mean, the strike rates look good at the end of it, right? 162 and 153. But in the 162 strike rate game, he was chasing 227 and he got off to a really slow start. And in the 153 game, he did slow down towards the middle. But what I am more concerned with over here is what is his role? Is he supposed to anchor? Do we even need anchors anymore in T20 cricket? Because Rizwan has been batting fast. There's clear intent over there. He's trying to score quickly and he's trying to compromise some of that average for strike rate, which is good. But I'm not sure over here why Babar Azam gets all of this criticism where he's not the reason Pakistan are 2-0 down. You can micro-analyze the innings, but he's not the problem over here. The bowling was the problem in these games. And I feel like mentally, Pakistan's fan base and the PCB have really done a solid number on Babar because he seems quite exhausted.
You and I did a podcast ages ago about the conversation with Babar Azam is quite toxic. Like, I follow a lot of people in and around Pakistani cricket, and I want to unfollow them all because of their pro or anti Babar Azam tweets on a near daily basis. It's just like, he cannot be in the news this much. What is wrong with you guys? Focus on friggin' all-rounder every now and again, right?
And that's why it's gotten more exhausting with time because, he's even trying over here. You can see that Babar is trying, right? You can make a case, you can criticize, you can microanalyze. Why is this a life and death situation for crying out loud?
Yeah, it's. I think you're right that they're not losing because of him. I still think I don't like the catch-up innings style,
Yeah, same.
unless you're Chris Gale, right? And even with Chris Gale, it caused issues for sometimes the teams he played on, sometimes the guys he batted with, right? But as a general rule, I don't like that style just because what it does is you end up with a good strike rate, but you end up with a good strike rate because you've batted so long. Not because you've made an impact earlier in the game, and it means that other players have to probably often sacrifice their wickets because you're batting too slow, right? So it doesn't.
Also, the days that you don't come off, it really throws everyone under the bus.
That's the bigger issue, is the days that it doesn't come off. But even when it comes off, like the KL Rahul situation of, well, his strike rate's still this, and it's like, yes, his strike rate is that. But if he had scored at a strike rate roughly of that all the way through the innings and averaged 10 less, in games, he would have a bigger impact for his team than he currently is doing this, right? Having said that, both of those players, KL Rahul and Babar Azam, they do it because they don't really trust their batting, right? When it comes down to it, we've talked about the Evan Galbus effect. It is a real thing. These guys do look at the batting order sometimes and just go, I don't know. I mean, where did Shaheen come in one of these games? Wasn't he batting at like number 6 in one of these games?
Yeah, he promoted himself up the order. He's done that for Lahore, and I was surprised. Actually, I wasn't surprised.
He promoted himself up the order, but he didn't really promote himself above batters, did he?
Yeah, he did. Amir Jamal. Amir Jamal just scored 82 at the, SCG in Australia in a test match. So.
Yeah, okay. So... yeah, I suppose. Yeah, there's one guy who can hit. I still think of him more of a bowler who can hit. Than
even Abbas Afridi, who we're going to get to in a bit because I really want to talk about him. He's, a better bat than Shaheen Afridi.
Oh, I'm not saying there are better bat. I suppose. Yeah, I think. Well, I don't even know who the coach is anymore. I haven't finished that. Well, is he coach or is he there? I really think that there's. I'll try and get Mickey Arthur on the podcast. I know he talked to. Was it Crickbuzz? No, Wisden. I think he did an interview.
Yeah,
with
he
the other
talked
day.
to Amir Malik at Wisden.
I'd love to get him on to talk about it, but I do think that with Bubba there is and you see this a lot with really talented players in general. That whole idea of that they don't trust anyone else to do the job. I wonder if that is a thing with Bubba, and because of that, he just bats that little bit slower, and it causes issues and doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, plus if the openers go deep with him at first drop, do you bat him at all? There's that question as well, right? So maybe he is best suited to open the innings and you have other people just, hit big around him and let him accumulate, and hopefully more days or more often than not, he'll come good. But it's a really hot topic right now. And while there is nuance in this conversation, the fact that it's been made so mainstream in Pakistan cricket media, literally it makes me not want to open Twitter. That's where we're at right now.
It's the dumbness of the conversation. And, we see this all the time with so many different things. And, we just had a week of David Warner, and there's so many people so angry with the video we made about David Warner, and they don't really want to get into the nitty gritty of the conversation. They just start with either David Warner was great or David Warner wasn't great, and there is no middle ground. You can't have a conversation with people who think that way. It's just pointless. And that's all the Babar Azam conversation has been for about 6 years.
I can't have conversations with respect to any discourse that's dealt in extremes. You have to have balanced views on things and look at all the facets that contribute to the way things are happening. But anyway, another shining light for Pakistan in this series. You mentioned him earlier. Of course, Fakhr slammed a whirlwind 50 and there were shades of Bengaluru. That was great viewing. But Abbas Afridi, seam bowling all-rounder. His uncle Umar Gul is part of the team management. So that's a little fun
awesome
fact over there. Yeah. I mean, Gul was number 55, Stokes is number 55, and Abbas Afridi chose to take number 55. So I love that. And I don't know how much of the PSL you followed, but he was absolutely sensational for Multan Sultans. And he was a key part of them reaching the finals. And this is a bowler, Jared, who, when you look at him bowl, he doesn't instill fear in the opposition batters. He's not that kind of bowler. He has a great back of the hand, slower one. And he mixes up his pace really well, throws himself around the field, really, really hard worker. And in this first series of his debut game, he took 3 wickets for, I think, 34 in a game where the opposition scored 226, and he has 5 wickets overall. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how much you've seen him play, but there's a lot of promise over here.
There is promise. I worry about bowlers who break onto the scene and take wickets and can't keep the economy rate down at all. Because
You remember that CSK guy? What was his name?
I mean, I've got a list of about 70 of these bowlers. But yeah, I'm sure the CSK guy is on my list. I can't even remember who that is now. But, I think you and I maybe even talked about this before, but it's something that I notice a lot. And these guys, they come in and they take a whole bunch of wickets. Everyone gets really excited. Then you look at their economy and you're like, wait, he's going at 9 runs and over. Right. So he's going to have to continue to take 1.5 wickets per game to keep himself in a side. Right. Yeah. And eventually you stop taking wickets. And when you stop taking wickets, that 9 runs and over doesn't go down. It goes up. Right. And I think he goes for more than that, because someone sent me a message. They wanted me to look into him. And I've seen some clips. I haven't got enough to have a thorough take. I think that people with that sort of kick-ass slow ball quite often take a lot of wickets in that kind of situation, and there's nothing wrong with the way he plays, but he's got to learn how to also shut the runs down. And I don't mean be a good economy bowler, but he has to get it to 8.5 runs and over, right? He has to be at that sort of thing, because Shardul Thakur is a perfect example of this, of just sort of bouncing around. Shardul is a okay wicket taker. Sometimes he's a really good wicket taker, but you can't bowl him because his economy is just unusable, right? And Andre Russell is another perfect example of Andre Russell just continues to take wickets at a nice enough rate that it's okay. But even Andre Russell at times has struggled with this kind of thing. And it's not easy. And especially, I suppose bowling's his main skills, and batting sort of his secondary. He can hit a little bit, can't he, more than being a batter. But I just don't think you can be a full-time bowler with that kind of economy rate. But I'm excited by the wicket-taking opportunities. Did you say it was his uncle, Umagul? Yeah.
Umagul is his uncle.
Yeah, there's a dude who can tell you how not to go for any runs, right? If you...
Teach Abbas Afridi how to bowl 6 Yorkers in an over.
Yeah. And so I do think that it's better to start with an extreme talent than not start with an extreme talent. But you can't just be completely one-dimensional in that way. You do have to have more about your game. And he's young. He's 22, 23. We're not talking about the finished product or anything near that at the moment. But there's a lot of potential there. But that's the thing I note.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest takeaway as well, because he's a developing cricketer. He has lots of time to up his game and also add a few clicks to his bowling. Maybe that would definitely help. And yeah, I mean, the fact that he can hit the ball around helps, and that slower one will be a useful weapon in T20 cricket. And Jay Rich has said that he was really impressed with him in the GT20, where he had a lot of heads turning, and apparently Jay Rich was there around the players and is crediting his change of pace, calling it beautiful. Anyway, Jared.
It gets a lot of drop on the ball, which I really like.
Yeah. I like that as well. Anyway, before we take a break, there's a super chat. So if you want to take that quickly.
Well, you start reading it and I'll find it.
Sure. So Sushriyo Misra says BBC documentary Out of the Ashes is from 2010, where Gulbuddin is shown as a young 18-year-old. I rewatched it recently. The math checks out. It doesn't check out.
Wait a minute.
The math is bad.
Out of the Ashes came out in 2010 and he was 18. So he's saying 14 years after that. Okay. Go back and have a look at it.
It does check out. My math is bad. I'm sorry, Shustrio.
But go back and have a look at it. And I'm pretty sure they say he was already a bodybuilder by that. So what, was he a 15-year-old bodybuilder? That's the math I'm not believing, right? I'm not saying there isn't 14 years since that movie came out. I'm saying he was 18 and he'd already had another whole sporting career at that point. The whole thing seems a little bit odd. Look, he's a fantastically interesting cricketer. If you haven't seen that film as well, weirdly enough, I was talking about that film today with someone. It's a really good one on the early part of Afghanistan cricket. And when you watch that movie and you're thinking, the way they just played in this last World Cup, it will blow your mind at how far back they started and to where they are now. So remarkable. But thank you very much for the super chat as well, mate.
Yeah, it's an amazing
and the maths.
journey, no doubt. Yeah. And I'm low-key. Honestly, I didn't even hear much of that because I was so embarrassed that me with an engineering background got that basic math wrong, and I had to apologize to Sushriyo. But anyway, we'll be back after a short break. You're watching Uncovered with Jared and Behram, and there's lots to talk about, so stay tuned after this short break.
Thanks to the kind folks at FlexiSpot for looking after my office and my butt by sending me their E7 Pro desk that save your favorite desk heights at a touch of a button. You don't have to crank anything. This thing just finds the height that you like and you can work. And their BS12 pro chair that supports my posterior while I'm recording, well, this ad and all my shows. If you need great desks, especially ones that change heights, or the best quality chairs, head on over to FlexiSpot today.
Welcome back to the Uncovered podcast. You're with Jared and Behram. And next up, we're going to talk about Sri Lanka versus Zimbabwe. There was a 3-match ODI series. One game got washed out and Sri Lanka won it 2-0. But, they could very well have lost again. Zimbabwe was in pole position to win the second ODI, but that's when newcomer Janith Lianage, I hope I got that pronunciation right, because I asked Estelle how that name was pronounced. He scored a vital 95. And, in the first game that got washed out, Charith Asalanka, who has been a bit of a mainstay in that middle order, he scored a ton. You also have Sadira Samra Wikrama in the fold, who's done well in recent times. So, Jared, Sri Lanka aren't going to be playing the Champions Trophy next year. So it makes sense for them to kind of build that batting core, come World Cup. That'll really help them.
Yeah, no, it makes sense for them to have Angelo Matthews opening the bowling.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, Angelo has said that he has been out of the T20 team because of agendas.
What agendas do all the franchises in the world have against him?
I'm not sure.
Do you know what I mean? Look, I've been following Angelo Matthews for so long. He's been one of my favorite cricketers. A lot of what he says, I just think, what is the point of this? Like, there was a legit agenda against him in that the team was upset. They thought he got overweight, right? That he wasn't taking it seriously. He went for years of maybe not being the player that we remember. Like, peak Angelo Matthews was a force. An absolute force. He couldn't bowl as fast as he used to. His body fell apart. Some of that is just old age as well, and overuse and everything else. But he's no longer really wanted that much on the major franchise circuit, right? He's not getting calls up to play in major leagues anymore. And he seems very angry with the situation he's been in. When he was young, I thought he was incredibly driven, incredibly smart, incredibly professional. When was the last time you probably thought of those three things? But look, smart's the only one that has probably stayed with him, obviously. You don't get that much dumber, although, depends. You might have parents who become conservative, but, you don't get, that much dumber in general, right? But he doesn't feel like he's been driven for a very long time. And I don't feel that same professional nature that he once had. If I was working with him, right? If I was, his private analyst, I'd be saying to him, are you doing everything you can to be the best cricketer you can be? Because 10 years ago, I would have said you are. And now I would question that, right? I would be looking inward. And that's not to say, you and I both know, there probably is nonsense within Sri Lankan selection, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But if you're in the best 3 or 4 players, they ain't dropping you. They're not dropping you if you're an absolute star. They're dropping you if you become a fringy type player. And I would argue that he probably did become a fringy like player, and he's way better than that.
I'll tell you one thing. Angelo, when he started off his career, he was a prodigy. It felt like he was the obvious successor to, Mahela and Sangha in that Sri Lankan middle order, particularly in Test cricket. That's where I liked him most. And over the years, he's had that drop off. He's gained weight and he started to speak a lot more. He wasn't that vocal a player in his youth. And now he seems to be whining. The whole timeout situation was embarrassing. This situation is embarrassing because you scored, 46 of 38. Why are you on this high horse? Sure, you literally snuck a game out of Sikandar Raza Butt's elite performance. Man scored 62 and took 3 for 13 in 4 overs, and still Zimbabwe lost, which is really sad. But what's the story here? Where is all of this arrogance coming from? I'm not a fan.
Well, so in 2023, and I know he came back later to the World Cup, so some of this is a bit weird, but in 2023, he played 8 ODIs and averaged 11, right? So he didn't shame the selectors there. In 2018, 2020, and 2021. So he plays 70-20 games in that time. Certainly averaged under 20 at probably around a run a ball, less than a run a ball, right? In 2017, he plays 5 T20s, averages 22 at less than a run a ball. In 2016, he averaged 41 at a strike rate of 119. That's what I'm talking about. He's putting up fringe performances, right? Like, you can't complain about selectors if when you do get a go, you don't do anything. This isn't a forward alarm situation or a Dean Jones situation or something where it's like, well, look at my numbers, fear me. It's like, they were clearly trying to rebuild, right?
Yeah.
And as I said, there were issues there. And I'm not saying there aren't political issues, 'cause obviously there are always going to be. But he put himself in a situation where they could do that. And that's the bit that I think too often with professional athletes, that they don't understand. They are not willing to also put their hand up and go, do you know what? I do think there was an agenda against me, and I do think they turned against me. But also, when I did get those opportunities, I didn't do enough with them, or I wasn't working on my fitness enough, or I wasn't working on my professionalism enough, or I wasn't working on my bowling enough, whatever thing it is, right? He is so talented, even to this day. He can come into the World Cup, wobble people out with his ridiculous old man bowling, right? He's still a really talented bowler, but, and clearly barely bowls anymore. And we know what he can do with the bat. But does anyone feel like when he came into the World Cup, we saw like a phenom? Like, outside of the innings where he didn't actually bat at all, he just didn't look like that level of player, right? And he's got to be honest.
For instance, let's compare his career, even though it's not a fair comparison, to Thisara Pereira. And I'm talking strictly in terms of T20 commodities. If you were to construct a T10 team today, I'm saying T10 because neither of those guys are getting into a T20 team. Which one are you picking? Of course, you're picking Pereira.
Yeah, and Pereira, you could argue there were some professional questions with him. He certainly was never a smarter player as Angelo Matthews, although, very clever T20 cricketer in his own way. But he 100% understood what was needed and what he needed to do to be successful. He needed to go out there and average about 15 with the bat, but strike at 170 strike rate. And he gave it a fair whack, right? And with the ball, he knew he had to take regular wickets and probably take some risk. And he put himself all into that sort of two baskets. Now, there are probably people in Sri Lankan cricket who will say, we didn't get the most out of him as an overall cricketer, and he went towards that T20 route to it. But he did that, and he optimized his performance. When was the last time you looked at Angelo Matthews and said he optimized the performance? He is still... Think about the way he can play in Asia, right? Think about the way he can field, right? And think about his ability to bowl 1 or 2 overs when you need them as a bowler. That's still an IPL level player. Yet, when was the last time he was on even a short list of an IPL team where they're like, oh, we've got to get him into the side, right? Maybe around the squads, maybe even in a couple of squads over the last 4 or 5 years. But when was the last time they looked at it and actually went, we're going to need him to play for us, right? It's like that, and you and I know there aren't that many. I mean, how many Asian good batters who are good in Asian conditions can also give you 1 or 2 overs of good seam and a good movers in the field, right? Like, he's still got everything that you would need for that.
Yeah, so, get your performances to do the talking, Angelo, and maybe something better than 46 of 38, even though you won Sri Lanka the game. And Phil Wilson is saying 5 T20 50s in a row for Sikandar Raza. So we did an entire podcast on Sikandar Raza. That's why I don't want to spend a lot of time on him today. He also
is he good now? Is he? I didn't know.
He also has the most player of the match awards in international cricket this year. I believe the number is at 9. In all of these games that you're talking about, he's also performed really well with the ball, albeit against weaker opposition, but 3 for 13 in this game. What I actually do want to talk about, Jared, though, is that Sikandar Raza is, 37? Then you've got some other older batters in this Zimbabwean lineup, such as Sean Williams and Craig Irvine, who actually got 82 for them in the second game. But it feels like once these guys call it a day, Zimbabwean cricket, at least in terms of the batting, is going to experience a pretty significant drop.
I think that's their issue already, right? I mean, we had an argument with a Zimbabwe fan on here a couple of weeks ago, and I don't think their batting is particularly strong already. And you're right. My big fear is that just as their bowlers finally develop into the kind of unit that they can be, it's a really good bowling unit, they're going to run out of batters. And hopefully, some young players can come through and things can change, and at least, back them up a little bit. But there is no doubt that this is a fantastic bowling unit. Sikandar, I say this with no knowledge at all, but if I was him, I would not be looking at retiring in the next couple of years. But Irvine and Williams might be thinking that 1 or 2 more years is all they have. And that team is held together by Sikandar Raza and bowling at the moment. And if you take away the batting and make the top order even weaker, he has to go in even earlier. Ryan Burl has to go in even earlier. One of them's probably going to have to bat top 4 if they can't find proper replacements. There's some issues there for them.
Some of them are going to have to make up for Joy Lord Gumby's strike rate.
Joy Lord is, it's,
The Lord of Joy.
They've got a lot of players who have had some top order batting over the last couple of years, and you just go, if this is in their let's say not even their best 4 players, if this is in their best 6 or 8 players, there's an issue in Zimbabwean cricket when it comes to batters at the moment. And to go back to your original point, I think that's an issue. Here's the bigger issue I have: this team is actually fully actualized. Right, outside of the one kid whose name I always forget, who's playing schoolboy cricket in England, and Gary Ballance retiring. This is pretty much Zimbabwe cricket at its best, and it's a really good balanced team with experience. A couple of younger players, excellent fast bowlers, excellent spinners, all rounders, and yet they keep getting themselves into positions to win, and they keep losing. Right, and we had the magic of the T20 World Cup in Australia. That's it. That's all we've got out of this incredibly good balanced team. And, Netherlands have embarrassed them, and, all these other teams that, have gone past them or beaten them at times or kept them at bay. And, Namibia have outperformed them, I would say, over the last couple of years consistently, right? It's like, well, if you can't win with this, as you said, what happens when you do get a couple of retirements, or I don't know, someone signs for Major League Cricket, or someone decides to only play franchise cricket instead of playing for you? I really worry about it because it's there and it's not winning, and I don't know if it's just because their top order is just not strong enough to give them the totals they need, or whatever that may be. But it really is. Sikandar Raza in any other team would be like the player that turns a decent team into a well-beating team. Sikandar Raza can't even turn them into a consistently winning team.
Yeah, and it's really all been downhill for the Chevrons since the Park Bean Derby in the T20 World Cup. If whoever does not know about that should Google it.
The ghost of Mr. Bean.
Yeah, I do not have the time to explain this story to you because we already have a lot of things to talk about. But you spoke of their bowling. Oh, sorry. And also Dave Houghton has resigned. So that's also bad news, right?
Oh, I missed that. When did that happen?
That happened. It happened recently. I saw that news.
Oh my God.
That is really bad. Didn't we? We suspected it.
Look, I think... oh God, that was 4 weeks ago. How did I miss that? The truth is that they haven't been winning, and they've played a lot of good cricket. And they have. I know it sounds weird. Zimbabwe fans get really angry when I say that, but they actually have played a lot of good cricket, and they did assemble a really good team, but it just hasn't worked. And he was always going to be the one to go. I don't think it's his fault though. And and I'm saying he's resigned here, but knowing Zimbabwe cricket, other things might have happened. But look, Dave Houghton is, I think that if you've got a franchise cricket team or a county cricket team, I think Dave Houghton, what he did with Zimbabwe was really change the trajectory of that team. But in the end, it didn't work. I think he's a really interesting coach going ahead.
Yeah, wish him the best of luck. And, maybe someone does snap him up, particularly in the franchise world. You spoke of Zimbabwe's bowling. They've been very, very impressive, their pacers in particular. And someone who took a fifer in the second game was Richard Ngarava. And this is someone who has really impressed me a lot over the last few years. He's actually, upped Muzarabani at times in the series for one. And that is, a feat on its own because Muzarabani, I think, is class. But, this is someone who seemed to have fallen off in between. He's once again, looking fiery. Zimbabwe have got to do something over here with these paces because if not now, then it's never. Literally, this is it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as we just said, I think as they're sort of all developing together, if they do lose a couple of batters, that will be an issue. Look, he's probably a player who is more suited to T20 than one-day cricket. And when you say he's fallen off, I think what you really mean is it depends on when you watch him. I think if you watch him in T20 cricket, you usually think he's pretty good. And in one-day cricket, it doesn't quite translate the same way so far. Incredibly talented, kind of a raw bowler, like kind of a, there's elements of like a Rahat Ali type thing of he's a left-arm bowler who doesn't maybe know everything that he needs to do in order to bowl a good delivery. But there's a lot of talent there. And I think I'm blanking on the third guy. Tendai?
Chitara, right?
Yeah. all three of them, and I get why Blessing is he's friggin' 19 foot tall and skillful.
Yeah.
But all three of them really show good things, and it's a good little attack, especially when you've got Burl and Sikandar Raza who can both bat as well as bowl. That's what I was talking about. There's a lot of good things, but I think I want to say Ingarava played in the Sri Lankan Premier League one stage, or the Lanka Premier League.
Someone's asking over here. Vuyu is saying whether or not he deserves an IPL contract, maybe a PSL contract. I know Blessing got one. He did well for Multan.
I think. What I was about to say is, I think he's not that far away from being a franchise player. IPL, I think he'd probably have to show it a little bit more on the circuit. As I said, because he's a little bit raw and things can go wrong with him at times. But if you're asking me if he has IPL level skill, IPL level talent or upside, the answer is yes. Like he is, that level of player. But he needs to work on all the soft skills and everything else that go with his game. But again, they have that talent there, and it's just sad that, I was watching the game the other day. I think you sent a message, it was Estelle, of course, who was saying Sri Lanka's going to lose this. And I flicked over, and the minute I flicked over, I thought to myself, no, they're not. This is a complete waste of my time. They're not going to lose this. And it's the amount of times that I've seen a game where I'm like, oh, Zimbabwe should win this game. And kind of by the time I sort of settle in to start watching it, they start to lose again. They have this incredible knack of not being able to keep the pressure on as long as possible.
Yeah, for love of God, Zimbabwe, please start winning some games, because you've got two fans in us over here and plenty of others. And Jay Rich has said that Ingarava has been picked for the Sylhet Strikers at the BPL, so best of luck to him. Final thoughts on Sri Lanka.
Certainly that level. Sorry, go.
Final thoughts on Sri Lanka, Zimbabwe before we can move on. The spin bowling duo has been doing well, and that is their primary weapon in limited overs games. Mahesh Theekshana took a four in the second game, and then Wanindu Hasaranga, on his comeback, took 7 for 19, which are like the fourth or fifth best ODI figures of all time in the third ODI. And, they rolled over Zimbabwe for 96 or 97 in the process. Also, both of them did well in the T20 game, and Hasaranga is now the new skipper. So lots of fun stuff over there.
I mean, it's funny because it feels like he's never fit or available. And look, I think you and I are big fans of him. He's certainly a talented player, and it'd be... I'd be really interested to see how he captains, because I think he thinks about cricket in a really interesting way, watching the way he plays, bats and bowls. I'm just glad he's back. But, Hasaranga is... I don't know how many times you've seen Hasaranga bowl to the players just below that elite level. So almost everyone from, Netherlands down, right? They have no idea what to do with Hasaranga. He just scythes through those sides. And not that he doesn't do it. We've seen him be successful in the IPL and internationals and everything. But that level below, they just look at him like he's bowling, he's bowling marbles at them, and they have no idea what to do against him. And so I'm not surprised that he did well again.
Well, I've seen him bowl to Pakistan batters who aren't, a level below, and he's made them look like absolute fools as well.
Well...
But anyway, on that note, we shall take a break over here. You're watching Uncovered with Jared and Behram, and lots of other fun stuff coming up. So stay tuned, and we'll be back after this short ad.
Occasionally, I also talk about behind-the-scenes stuff. Huge thanks to everyone who has supported us on Patreon and helped us build this channel. Join our Patreon community and unlock exclusive benefits. Enjoy AMAs, live calls with me, and connect with fellow cricket enthusiasts on Discord. Express your cricket fandom with Bodyline t-shirts. Discover their extensive range of player-inspired tees, featuring cricket legends such as Murali, Warne, and Wazim. With team-themed designs and options for hardcore cricket nerds, they've got you covered no matter what your interest in cricket is.
Welcome back to Uncovered. You're with Behram and Jared, and there's this very interesting back and forth going between Jay Rich and Usha Arora in the comments. Usha Arora has sent 15 messages at least asking for what our thoughts are on Smith as test opener. We're not going to bother because there's a footmarks coming up anyway.
Dude, literally, you will get 45 minutes of our opinions on that. Just wait.
Maybe even more the way these podcasts go. But anyway, let's go to the next topic. And Sandeep Lamichhane, prodigy leg spin bowler from Nepal, broke onto the scene and, brought Nepal or Nepalese cricket to the forefront. Everyone was talking about it, picked up franchise gigs. He has been sentenced to 8 years in prison on charges of rape. It was kind of coming. But Jared, you and I were talking off camera, and you mentioned how this is not the first time something like this has happened in cricket. And, in past instances, the people who have been involved in these sorts of charges and sentences, they've gotten away with it.
Yeah, I think, obviously this Mackay and Tini case is maybe the most famous. Scott Kugelheim of recent times is another one. There's some others I can't mention for legal reasons, as well, of, interesting things that have happened in cricket. And I think cricket does have a sexual, I probably want to say sexual assault problem rather than, this is obviously the other end, the far end of that scale. But I do think a lot of cricketers don't really understand, and not trained correctly by cricket boards, the rights and wrongs of how to deal with. Oh, sorry, we also had the case in Australia with Gunathalaka. Is it Gunathalaka?
Yeah, Gunathalaka. And I think Estelle was mentioning another Sri Lankan great.
Yeah, there's certainly been situations in the past of these sorts of things happening. I think what was interesting here is, with Sandeep being a national hero and everything else, I kind of just thought this would go away. I haven't been following the case. And also, there was the other case too in Bangladesh. I forget was it a bowler who was charged with rape, but it was actually that he had premarital sex with a woman and then broke off the marriage. So the thing is that rape and sexual assault and all these different types of things and are very different in every single different country. But I just figured that, generally the powerful athletes get away with, Kobe Bryant and Ronaldo. And, there's always these sort of allegations against these sorts of people. Usually they sort of disappear that way. So
yeah, Robinho was one Brazilian footballer. Then was Franck Ribéry from France. There are plenty of cases over here that we could mention. But
the point is that they usually I just didn't expect him to go to jail. I expected it to be plead down or to be settled out of court or whatever they did to get away with it. So I was shocked when I saw this. I'll be honest. Someone who's followed sport for so long, I just didn't expect this to happen. But I hadn't been following the trial, so I don't know if you had been following the trial and it was just an open and shut case, and there was nothing that was always going towards this. I don't know enough about that, but just huge that the biggest cricketer in maybe one of the most exciting cricket nations on earth, or most exciting development cricket nations on earth, have lost their star player, and it would be fascinating to see what happens next.
Yeah, I mean, I would expect Nepal to protect him, as sad as that sounds, because they'd want him to be on the field. And I mean, a Kathmandu court made the ruling, so he still hasn't gone to jail. He's just been sentenced. We wouldn't know for sure till he actually does go to jail. But yeah, I mean, in terms of precedent setting, at some point, something like this has to happen.
Yeah, as I said, I don't think, and I say this as someone who's worked inside the game and has a lot of friends who are players and past players and everything else. I'm not surprised that this happens. I'm almost surprised that it doesn't happen more often. I don't think that there's something about the way that professional athletes are brought up, especially the male ones, obviously, but the way they're brought up, there's a sense of entitlement, especially when it comes to women. Again, I don't know anything about this case, so I don't even know what happened, right? I just don't know enough about it. But as a broader spectrum, I do think it is an issue within cricket. And I don't think it's just about, this is the really extreme end of it, obviously. But we've seen Joe Clark and Alex Hales and other players get involved with WhatsApp messages about women and, keeping trophies and all this sort of stuff. It's icky at times. And the conversations I've had with players and everything else. And someone was telling me the other day that there's a prominent IPL player whose name I've now forgotten as well, but who's like a massive Andrew Tate fan. It's like, dude, 12-year-olds are massive Andrew Tate fans. Anyone older than 12 who likes Andrew Tate needs to reevaluate everything about their life. But again, it's all that sort of stuff is just like, wait, what are we talking about here? And it's an issue for cricket going forward. These things, obviously, the main problem here is the victim, and they've hopefully they feel happy with the justice that's been meted out and everything else. But cricket has a place within the society that it exists in, and sports can't run away from that. This whole idea of sport and politics don't mix it. Cricket has a place within our society, and it needs to do the best it can. And as I'm telling you, as someone who's worked in the sport, I don't believe that is the case. I don't think that this has worked on as well as it could be.
Yeah, and particularly, in South Asia, it's even bigger than there is in the rest of the world. And I'll tell you one thing about the justice system in South Asia. It's not very good. So let's see how this unfolds. Anyway, Sarfaraz non-selection. A lot of you people who are watching this must think we're talking about the Pakistan wicketkeeper. Shayan thought we were talking about the Pakistan wicketkeeper. We're not talking about Sarfaraz Ahmed. We're going to be talking about Sarfaraz Khan. He is, big-time run scorer in the Ranji Trophy. He had a hiatus of roughly 3 to 4 years from first-class cricket, Jared, and Sarfaraz Khan, ever since he came back, scored 3,157 runs at an average of 85 all over. In India, that average goes up to 92 odd.
I think he's got the second highest first-class average ever behind Bradman at the moment. I think I'm right in saying that.
That's even more crazy. And he just scored 96 versus the England Lions in a 2-day game. Yet, once again, he's been left out of India's test squad for the England series. This happens every time India pick a test squad. There's lots of discourse on Sarfaraz Khan. And I mean, do you think it's a touch harsh considering India have selected a third wicketkeeper in Dhruv Jurel? And I mean, there's the larger question over here or debate over here that India prioritizes or picks players on the basis of the IPL and the Ranji performers aren't getting rewarded. Do you think it's an issue?
I think if you want to know what I think the main issue is, I think it would be his body fat index, right? And I think there is definitely a prejudice against that. I also think that under Virat Kohli specifically, there was a real movement towards players getting more fit, and that Indian cricket has tried to honour that as much as possible. Look, he's a fascinating cricketer because there's nothing about him that says he shouldn't be a great IPL cricketer, right? Like, it just hasn't happened. It doesn't, like, he was exciting. Was it the first year he came into the IPL? And it was like, wow, this guy could be anything. Literally, RCB let KL Rahul go and kept him. And it was a bit more complicated than that as someone was around at that time. But essentially, they did think he was going to be that good, and he hasn't. I do understand the whole Ranji thing and why you would be frustrated. I think that especially with Rahul Dravid, who's probably worked in development quite a bit with the underage teams and the A team, he has a very good idea of who he probably thinks is better. Far more than, Brendan McCullum doesn't know who the best A team player. Like, he can be told, but he's not out there working with them, right? And so I do think compared to most coaches, Rahul Dravid will have an idea. And I would say it's probably more to do with that than anything else when it comes to the Ranji players. But we're seeing all around the world that teams are backing talent over performance in some of those red ball competitions. But I do think with him, it is a lot of it is, and look, I'm not going to relitigate the body shaming and the athletes and all being different sizes and all those different things that we've talked about many times before. But I do think there is an element of that as well. I think him and Prithvi Shaw are noticeably bigger dudes now, right?
Yeah.
And India isn't. I always think about it. We go back to the Angelo Matthews thing of before, right? When you have a situation where you are on the edge of being picked, right, and you're not an automatic player, when you were in that situation, if the other person is fit and you're not fit, you won't get picked. And that is, I almost think that at a certain point, you kind of have to accept that is the case. Whereas if you're just so much better than everyone else, and I think that's where Sarfaraz is now getting to, people are saying, well, wait a minute. It's no longer that he, if he's averaging this and no one else is, I think that's when that comes in. But the truth is that those sorts of players do have to overperform. Mark Cosgrove, one of the best natural batters I've ever seen. Australia played him. He made some runs. And ultimately, they just went for other players, right? And, we've seen that again and again with cricket teams, probably since the mid-90s. They quite often, fielding is important, athleticism is important, running between wickets, all these different things. It's not just about being able to do one part of your job correctly.
Yeah, and I mean, you could probably get it away with it in T20 cricket because it's a shorter format. Test cricket is a whole different animal, right? So
if he's making runs in first class cricket, it's an extra day. Maybe he can't Test cricket. I don't know, but you would think he would be fine. But you're right. And all these things matter. But if you're asking me the main reason, that's where I would be putting my money.
Yeah, no, that's fair, I guess. And well, maybe in the future he is, or he continues to, chart those runs, and maybe we'll see Sarfaraz Khan in Test cricket. But before we end this podcast, I put in this segment specifically because you have a story over here. David Warner.
I saw it and I was like, does he want me to tell the story or does he have more info?
No, I don't have any info. For those of you who don't know, David Warner was on a family vacation and he was scheduled to play a Big Bash game at the SCG. And Warner came on a helicopter directly to the Sydney cricket ground, which is very, very David Warner-like. But Jared has some more context to this story.
So David Warner loves helicopters, right? There are two things that we know about David Warner. He likes turtles and he likes helicopters. So I don't know if you had this in Canada, but very briefly on Uber, and I don't know if you had to get a separate app, but you could get a helicopter between places.
I didn't have the budget for it, but I did have
Obviously. I remember having a conversation anyway, the reason I knew that Uber had helicopters was because David Warner told me, right? And he's saying, "Oh, Jared, you just can't get around Sydney anymore without a helicopter." And I kind of thought he was taking a mickey a little bit. And then I went, "What?" And he was like, "Oh, the new Uber," and he showed me it. And he goes, "Oh, I love it. I'll get a helicopter everywhere." And I'm thinking, look, Sydney's hard to get around, but it's not like Mumbai or, London or New York. Like, you can get around Sydney. Not always easy, but you can. And so then we were in St. Lucia, and the main airport in St. Lucia is down south, and the cricket grounds are up north. Now, when I say down south and up north, we are talking maybe an hour and a half if you have a slow driver. I've done that trip from south to north in 40 minutes with a quick driver. Like, if you've got someone who's willing to put his foot down, there's not a lot of traffic in St. Lucia, put it this way. Right? It just depends on how you like driving around mountainy roads. And David Warner's like, we should all chip in and get a helicopter and we should go up. And I'm thinking, by the time you go and check and you do all that, and then also the whole team won't even fit in on a helicopter as well. Like, imagine being the sort of people that you do it. And then I'm thinking, well, a helicopter's still going to take 15 or 20 minutes to get up to the north part of the island anyway. And also, my guess is you then have to get a car from the helicopter. Anyway, the man loves helicopters. So when I heard this story, I was just like, this is the most David Warner thing ever. If somehow David Warner could get a turtle on a helicopter, that would be his perfect life.
What about a turtle-shaped helicopter? That's the holy grail right there.
Just get one of those big leatherback turtles, which I think they might have in St. Lucia as well. Hollow it out, put a propeller on top. It is exactly what David Warner wants in life. So I was the only, I think a lot of other people, oh, he's getting a helicopter. I was the only person going, he always gets helicopters. The man loves a helicopter. He probably got a helicopter to go to his local McDonald's to get a burger.
They should have had the helicopter song when he kind of landed at the SG. I don't think I'm not sure if you've heard it or not. It was like a meme, but go check that out. Anyway, that's a fantastic note, I suppose, to end this podcast.
It's a note.
Jay Rich is asking where I was at in Canada, so I'll just tell him I was studying at Waterloo and then I was living in Toronto, 11 years over there. So yeah, maybe I'll be back someday. But anyway, thanks to everyone in the comment section who participated. We always love having these interactions. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel, subscribe right now. Subscribe to Jared's other channel as well. And that's it for Uncovered this week. We'll be back next week with episode 68. That's all from Jared and Bahram. Goodbye.
So if you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your Nord VPN plan plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a cricketer protects its nether region with NordVPN today.